So I turned 31 recently, and when the day came, I did what I've often done in recent birthdays, which is take some time to reflect and think to myself, what have I learned? What nebulous wisdom have I accrued in the last year or longer? What insights could I crystallize for myself and maybe even share with others, as I've attempted to do in the past? But this particular birthday, I kind of fell into a pessimistic funk. I realized that I had failed to learn some lessons which I had hoped I would have learned by this age. I think it's sometimes called the myth of arrival, this notion that by a certain point in time, you will become the idealized version of yourself, or at least a better version of you. For me, I'd hoped by this age that I'd be the kind of person who wouldn't get frustrated with petty things or envious. I'd be the kind of person who does the right things, who says the right things, who feels the right things. And I'm not. I'm not that person. I'm not the person I want to be. A more accurate way of putting it is that I'd hoped that by this age, the texture of my experience, the experience of being me, would have been different, changed, better. It's not that I wouldn't have problems anymore, but the process of solving those problems would be easier, and that I'd be dealing with a better kind of problem. I would have graduated to some more noble or worthwhile type of obstacle to overcome. And in many ways, that hasn't happened. It's not that I haven't matured at all, don't get me wrong. Inevitably, I've changed in many ways for the better. I'm more confident, particularly when it comes to my likes and dislikes. I don't get FOMO as much because of that. A lot of things don't bother me as much, not because of any sort of noble quality in myself, but I think because of the infinite capacity humans have for boredom. You know, the 200th time you see a horror, you sort of have to think to yourself, okay, here we go again, you know? There's this book by David Lipsky called Although, of course, you end up becoming yourself. It's a transcript of a 5-day road trip he took with the writer David Foster Wallace, who at the time was doing a book tour for Infinite Jest. And it's a great book, I love it, but the title really haunts me. Although, of course, you end up becoming yourself. In one sense, I think it's potentially kind of liberating, right? I think we evangelize in our culture this notion of finding your true nature and discovering who you are and leaning into it. And this notion exists that beyond that point, once you've had that realization, life gets better. And when it's really pushed and mythologized, you find your destiny. What is meant for you will come to you. But what if your true self is shitty? What if it's not good, right? What do you do with that discovery? Surely you should fight it, right? You shouldn't just go blindly accept it. Which, by the way, I have a lot of issues with the way acceptance is used in our culture. I think a lot of times the word acceptance is a veil for fake joyful resignation. To me, acceptance is just coming to terms with reality. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything about it or that you can't. But I think a lot of times when people say, you need to accept this, it's you need to be resigned to it. I hate that. I mean, maybe sometimes you should be resigned to it, but at least be open about it, you know? Acceptance is very spiritually seen as a good thing, I suppose. There's a better way of phrasing that. But you know what I mean? No one ever gets angry at you for accepting something, but resigning, that's a different story. And do we have to be resigned to becoming ourselves? I sometimes think about genetic determinism, anecdotal stories of identical twins separated at birth who end up living very similar lives and getting similar jobs and marrying similar people. Is all my struggle and toil subjectively of trying to bend myself and mold myself into this idealized person I want to be as pointless as building sandcastles on a beach and hoping they stay, when in reality they just get washed away almost instantaneously? I sometimes think that not knowing who you are is a hallmark of youth, right? Isn't the process of becoming an adult kind of self-discovery, right? But is it self-discovery or is it decision-based? Do you get to make yourself or do you find out who you are? I've always loathed when anyone, but sometimes I think it's associated with older people, when they'll use the excuse of their character to justify their actions. They'll go, well, I'm just that kind of person. I'm just a grumpy person. I'm just, not into that. What do you mean you're not? You can make a decision to not act in a bad way, but also to a certain extent, maybe that's honest. You do have certain proclivities, and I'm learning that, and I don't know if I like it. Oh, God. Maybe part of the fear is that if you use a clay analogy, the clay gradually sets over time, and maybe mine's setting, and I'm not quite the shape I'd hoped I'd turn out to be, you know? And I can almost hear older people saying, don't be ridiculous, you're still so young. This notion of claiming that you're old or young is pointless, because you're always going to be heard by people younger than you who can't ever imagine being that old and go, yeah, you are old. And then it's going to be heard by people older than you going, you have no idea. So whatever. But I hope you know what I mean. To what extent can we change our nature? To what extent should we? Is it worth that fight? Or that blood, sweat, and toil if it makes 1% of difference? I don't know. Or do you eventually become yourself? And that chasing the idealized version of yourself is as pointless as chasing the horizon. It's just going to recede at the same speed at which you approach it. I don't know. That's the lesson I haven't learned turning 31, or the question I haven't answered yet. If you know the answer, please let me know. Otherwise, hopefully I'll have an answer for you by the time I'm 32.